Mom was always really fond of telling people, including me, that I was the one that taught her to drive, and of course that really wasn't true, but I did have a hand in it, and that hand in helping her learn to drive and gain some freedom for herself to get out and about and start a whole new life was one of those things that I always took a lot of pride in, and it kind of helped create a special bond with me and Mama that, like all of us 11 siblings have with her, thinking of things that happened at times of our lives and times of her lives and what she was going through. The situation was that our father died when I was early years of high school, and before I even knew how to drive myself. And thanks to Annette Lindbergh and driver's ed, I did in fact learn to drive in my sophomore year of high school. During the course of that following year, Bobby, who was the oldest at the time, left for college, which left me as the only person at home who could legally drive. Now, of course, Annette really did, living next door, really did so much to take care of Mama and get her to places she needed to go to and get others to places they needed to go. But, slowly I kind of became the de facto family driver for most, simple things. About this time in the South, farming as we knew it was really changing. Everything was getting mechanized, and there really wasn't much work for people to do. So they didn't need the large families and people to do farm work anymore. So there was some federal government programs that were trying to get people retooled and retrained to go back to work. One such program in South Carolina was to take some women, like in Mama's situation, and train them in things such as food services. They could go off and get jobs in high school cafeterias or other institutions, and Mama was obviously a natural for that program. I'm not sure exactly how she got hooked up with it, but she did. And of course, she was very excited. There were two prerequisites for the program. The first was to have a GED, or a high school diploma. Mama did go back to school to get her GED, and of course passed with flying colors. There was never any question there. The second part of the qualification was a little bit different. It required that all women in the program gather in Kingstree, which is about 10 miles from where we lived, every morning for some period of time, and from there take a bus to Manning, which I guess is in Clarendon County, to take training at some sort of certification or whatever in food preparation. And of course, to get to Kingstree in the morning, someone had to drive Mama, and of course that turned out to be me. So every morning before school, she would get me up, give me enough time to get woken up with the driver to work, or the driver to catch the bus, and I would. And then we wake everybody else up and leave the house. And with this early morning, pre-daylight missions to Kingstree, I wasn't exactly the most experienced driver in the world. Sometimes it was kind of harrowing driving those foggy roads on the way to Kingstree, but it was all a special time for me and Mom. I would take her there in the morning to catch her bus, and it seemed like we would on the parking lot waiting for the bus a lot of times. So looking back, I think Mom actually had us leave 30 minutes early to get this 10-minute trip. But she and the other ladies would get in their bus, and they'd go off to Manning. And every afternoon after school, I'd go pick Mama back up again. We'd come back home. And so, of course, I got to hear about her day and her excitement there. And she was so proud in her little white food workers uniform and sneakers. And we had some really good times talking together there. Now, for Mom to get into the workforce, everybody knew she really had to find a way to learn how to drive, which she had never done, of course, before, than just a little bit of driving to pick up in a field or something. So she had to learn to drive, and I took it upon myself to say, well, Mama, I can teach you to drive. Now, this is a little bit complicated because the car we had was a 1960 Ford Falcon with stick shift on the column, so it was a very antique kind of thing. Most younger parkers would have never seen anything like that. And of course, it had a hair trigger clutch, which was very sensitive and very fussy. And the car was a real piece of work. This was, keep in mind, was I guess 1975, 76. So the car was a good 15 years old. So after spending a couple of days telling Mama how the clutch worked and the brakes worked and the gas worked and the gear shift worked and all this sort of stuff, we finally got brave enough on the way home from work on a real deserted area of the road at the time to actually stop and have Mama get behind the wheel of the car. So she got behind the wheel of the car, she adjusted the mirror, seat, and all those kinds of things, and then promptly, of course, stalled the car out, as most people do on their first time of driving, trying to drive a stick shift. Of course, Mama stalled out another 2 or 3 dozen times. We finally gave up that particular day and I drove us on home. But not to be deterred, we decided to do it again the next day and the next day. And Mama eventually would get the car going. So, of course, it was a lot of jerking and stuff as we took off. And on the road, a lot of grinding as she tried to get the gears shifted from first to second. Couldn't quite get the clutch right. So it was a real struggle, but it got a little better, along the way. But, eventually, either Lindbergh or one of our uncles suggested what I might do is have Mama put the car in high gear and just really accelerate the car really quick before she took off with the clutch. That way she could actually get the car on the road. We tried that one day, and of course it was pretty much like a real jerk to my neck and everything as we took off. And the car wasn't really fast to burn any rubber, but we did get the car on the road, and Mama was actually driving down the road in third gear. Of course, when cars were coming, she'd be kind of squeamish about getting over the right side of the road enough to do it. But we tried that for a while as well, and that did help Mama get the car on the road, but we never really mastered the art of driving that '60 Ford Falcon, because as you can imagine, and all of us know Mama, we loved her very much, but coordination was not a real strong suit of hers. The real game changer happened whenever Ethel May was ready to replace her 1966 Pontiac land yacht of some sort, and she actually gave that car to Mom to learn how to drive on. And of course, with that better car and things like that, and Annette was able to actually legally drive with her, so they were able to actually take Mama out driving on real roads, which I couldn't, because you couldn't legally, drive with, teach an adult to drive at 15 and a half or anything. But that sort of opened the door for Mama to get to learn how to really drive. Mama did have to get a driver's permit, of course, this legally, and it took her a couple of times. The first time, from what I remember telling me, I don't think she actually got past the first part of the sign test, because these were the early days. There were no real computers. It was more like a kiosk with buttons to push and kind of move the signs yes, no, and I suspect she submitted a test before she took the second part. The second time she did indeed get that driver's permit, and that time she was able to actually get on the road and learn to drive. During this time, Mama, of course, had graduated from the food service program. She was actually doing some substitute work at the local high school, Hebron, as well as, I believe, doing some work with the King Street Elementary area, where they had basically a central place for the food to go to multiple elementary schools. But she was taking her driver's, was trying to get her driver's license, and it took Mama more than a few times. Every time, I understand, she got a little further out of the parking lot where they made her come back. But after 5 tries, she did indeed get her driver's license. And when she got her own driver's license, she was then able to become the little chauffeur for her and a couple of neighbors who were also assigned to work at the local high school cafeteria. And that was kind of the Mama really breaking free and having all this freedom to drive. Of course, during this time frame, I went off to college and left home, and left Lloyd being the oldest person at home. But Mama and I, when I was home, we talked a lot about her work and stuff. And that's another story. But as far as Mama learned to drive, I've had a very long IT career, and the early part of my IT career was doing a lot of automation of systems, replacement of systems, and I've had to train a lot of people how to learn to use new systems that go from pencil and paper and hard copy ledger to using application systems. And I've had my successes and failures. Some people simply can't take to it. Some just retire to avoid things like that. But I've always been very much attuned to the challenge it was for those people to learn to do something a totally different way, to sit in front of a strange device and learn to do your job a totally different way, or just that intimidation of that computer system. And over time, I've actually found myself saying, if my mother at 48 can learn to drive a car, you can learn to use that computer system. And I've used that line a couple of times, and I've always thought how true that was. It was no less intimidating for Mama to sit in front of behind that steering wheel and take off that first day with her 15-and-a-half-year-old son trying to learn how to drive a car. And, eventually, of course, getting that driver's license. But what I guess it all meant to me was part of Mama's character. She always did what she had to do to make her life better and her family's life better. That was, of course, raising a family in poverty and putting up a lot of different things. And for her to sit in front of that behind that metal and steel and take off down the road and take on that challenge was just an amazing piece of character for her, and something I will always remember as one of those characteristics of Mama that was just always so special. And she always did the best she could with what she had, and whatever it took to go forward, she did it. Another reason we really loved her, not just as our mother, as a human being.